Hey there, and welcome to webinar number 3 in our series. I know we had a little bit of a break between sessions, but I'm glad you came back and are joining us. If this is the first webinar you've caught with us, we'll have a link at the end of the slide deck talking about the other 3 webinars in the series. So today we're going to be talking about CentOS Linux is reaching end of life. Now what? My name is Eric, the IT guy Hendricks. I'm a technical contributor and operations advocate here at Red Hat. So I work a lot in the marketing space. You can find me just about anywhere out on the internet as IT guy Eric. But we're not here to talk about social media. We are here to talk about what's going to happen now that CentOS Linux is no longer under development, and CentOS Linux 7 here in the next 18 months or so is going to go end of life as well. So today we're going to talk about stories from a recovering sysadmin, what changed in CentOS, the community. We'll talk about what CentOS Stream is, and we'll talk about what you can do if you need more than a community Linux distribution. So with that said, my name is Eric Hendricks, and I was a systems administrator for close to 10 years prior to joining Red Hat. I was very active in the open source community. I hung out on a number of different podcasts, virtual and local meetups virtual meetups across the internet, and in-person meetups here out of my hometown of Kansas City. So I've done the 2 a.m. on calls. I've done the paid support, the community support. I've kind of seen a little bit of everything. In fact, in a previous webinar, we were talking about the pains of having to manage multiple different Linux distributions as well as multiple different major versions, and just how painful that can be and how much that can just kind of eat away at your momentum. So I remember being a sysadmin and working on CentOS Linux 7 and also having some RHEL 7 servers. And just the contrast of the two was enough to make me realize the value that Red Hat brought. That's not a slam against CentOS Linux at all. In fact, I love the CentOS Linux community, as we'll talk about as we dive in. But one of the things that really struck me about CentOS was the inability to solve problems. Excuse me. When it comes to support in a community distribution, you have things like Stack Exchange, you have IRC message boards, you have the old-fashioned PHP bulletin boards, PHP BBs. I'm sure we all have stories about troubleshooting problems at 2 a.m. on a bulletin board. And the question I started asking myself, the older I got, the more experience I gained, was, is this worth it? Is this the best use of my time? Is this how I want to be clocking in, doing my work, and clocking out? Isn't there more I can bring to the table? So as we talk about what changed with the CentOS community, bear in mind that CentOS, I owe CentOS a lot. The CentOS community is how I trained, how I built out my home labs. It's how I got familiar with the open source world, was through the CentOS community. So there's absolutely nothing about CentOS that I would change. CentOS being the community, I'll make sure to distinguish when we're talking about the community and when we're talking about the project. I had this problem with when interviewing Matthew Miller, the Fedora project lead, a few weeks back. We were talking about Fedora the community and Fedora the distribution. So I'll make that same distinction here. But as you may recall, almost 2 years ago now, the CentOS community, in partnership with Red Hat, made some changes to the project itself. So I want to start there. Around 2014, this is what the enterprise ecosystem looked like for Linux distributions in the Red Hat family. Obviously, there's things like Ubuntu, SUSE, and others, but we're just focused on the Red Hat family of Linux distributions. So if you're unfamiliar with the open source development lifecycle, the open source model, if you will, Linux is made up of hundreds or thousands of packages. And all those packages feed downstream is how we describe it. So let's take the Linux kernel, for example. The Linux kernel is a GitHub project, probably the most popular and one of the most active of all of GitHub's projects. If you look at their enterprise, their open source, their community, they're free. The Linux kernel probably leaves just about every other project, maybe except Kubernetes, in the dust. So anything that goes into any Linux distribution starts with a Linux kernel, and that starts with a Linux kernel project. Now, this view could be expanded out to things like OpenSSL, glibc, X11, Wayland, any of these package sets and their dependencies start in the upstream, and it starts very abstract. Maybe abstract isn't the best word, but it starts out very generic, would probably be a little bit more accurate. It's designed for specifically any Linux system. And so what we want to do from there, we start out with this wide view of the world of supporting Canonical's distributions, Debian, SUSE, Fedora, CentOS, RHEL, Red Hat Enterprise Linux. So Linux kernel starts out very, very broad. And then we zoom into the Fedora Linux space. Fedora Linux is a community. It's an open source community that's heavily focused on the developer space. So this is kind of the testing ground. This is where the people of the Fedora community actually pull all these different packages in together. They grab this Linux kernel version, they go over here and grab this OpenSSL package, they go over here and say, let's grab Pipewire. Pipewire is an audio video subsystem for Linux that came out in Fedora Linux just a few years ago. And so it's very focused on testing out new technologies. So before Podman ever came to Red Hat Enterprise Linux, Podman is an alternative to Docker. Podman actually was tested out in several versions of Fedora Linux before it ever made it into Red Hat Enterprise Linux. And so that's how things worked. You try all these things out, and you get a fairly stable, very performant operating system. In fact, my workstation here at home runs the latest version of Fedora Linux, and I do a lot of my content development on that platform. Excuse me. One of the downsides, depending on your use case, let me rephrase that. Depending on your use case, Fedora moves very, very fast. There's a new major release every 6 months, and the previous major release is only supported for a few months after that. So it's incredibly fast paced. So if you're trying to develop some new piece of hardware, some new IoT device, some new subsystem that you want to eventually see inside of an enterprise Linux platform, the Fedora Linux project is a great place to do that. The Fedora Linux community is incredibly insightful. They're incredibly intelligent, and they're very welcoming as far as online communities go. That's why I spend a lot of my time with the Fedora Linux community, just because a lot of my friends, people that I've met at conferences, people that I've worked with, all interact in one way or another with the Fedora Linux project. So as of 2014, zooming in a little bit further, every few years, Red Hat Enterprise Linux would grab the latest major version of Fedora Linux and pull that in-house. RHEL is obviously focused on the enterprise. It's focused on a partner ecosystem. It's designed for stability, security, and performance. And those aren't just marketing buzzwords that we throw out there. We make sure that Red Hat Enterprise Linux is stable for years, if not a decade or more, so that you can build out your banking mainframes, your nuclear submarines, your Fortune 500 e-commerce sites can all run on Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and you'd have a predictable release cycle. You've got enterprise class support. We're all pretty familiar with the paradigm that Red Hat Enterprise Linux works with. But as of 2014, and up until a couple of years ago, CentOS Linux actually trailed Red Hat Enterprise Linux by several months to even half a year. It was focused on very cost-sensitive users. It was focused on ecosystem developers. And one of the reasons for that was it was easy to acquire. You just go out to CentOS.org and you download the ISO, and it didn't cost you anything. There's pluses and minuses for that, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But CentOS Linux was essentially a clone, a rebuild of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. So as you might imagine, 2014 was nearly 9 years ago. And the technology industry has changed quite a bit. The business requirements for technology and for technology platforms has evolved quite a bit. In fact, nowadays with methodologies like DevOps and infrastructure as code, things are moving faster and faster. And we've seen over the past years how container development, things like Podman, Kubernetes, Docker, have really changed the application deployment approach. All this has made technology move faster. So with Red Hat Enterprise Linux and with CentOS, we found out that we're starting to trail behind, and we had to make a change. So Red Hat and CentOS, the community, actually got together, including the CentOS board, and came up with CentOS Stream. CentOS Stream was going to be designed to be much faster than Red Hat Enterprise Linux, but we didn't want just another Fedora. We already had Fedora. We needed something in between the slow and steady of RHEL and the trying new things each major release of Fedora. We needed something that kind of sat in a sweet spot. There was a gap. And so what the CentOS Linux community came up with, it was this idea of Stream, and partnered with Red Hat and some of the other major companies that are represented on the CentOS board. CentOS Stream was officially introduced into the ecosystem. As a result, being a community developed and a community funded project, excuse me, some sacrifices had to be made. And that was when it was decided to let CentOS Linux go by the wayside. So one thing I wanted to call out in the slide was the project doesn't recommend CentOS Stream 8 any longer. That's CentOS Stream 9. So that came into production in the second quarter of 2021. And so the reason for that being that Red Hat was excited about this opportunity because it gave our engineers a place to test things out, to get community feedback, to get partner involvement. And that was because when we went from Fedora to RHEL, things would go under NDA, things would be developed kind of in-house between our engineers and our partner ecosystem. So with CentOS Stream, that gave us the ability to develop in the open. And so the CentOS community also introduced SIGs, special interest groups. And what these are initiatives or next generation technologies that not just Red Hat and not just the CentOS community are working on, but major vendors, telecommunications companies, energy companies, social media companies, search engines, can all get together on common ground and talk about the future of technology and what we can develop to make that technology work better. Things like IoT, things like automotive. There's some SIGs around hyperscalers. There's SIGs around infrastructure automation. So these special interest groups are open to the public. Their work issues, I think their GitLab tickets are all open to the public. You can actually go in and request features. You can actually go in, test nightly builds of code and provide feedback. You can go and develop code within these SIGs. All of this is done in the open. And so you can see what are Red Hat and their partner ecosystems working on that'll end up in the next generation of enterprise Linux. So as you can see, this timeline's incredibly important as we kind of come up on the 18-month mark from the end of life of CentOS Linux 7. June 30th, 2024, CentOS Linux 7 will become end of life. CentOS Linux 8 was cut short. There is no CentOS Linux 9. Instead, there's CentOS Stream 8 and CentOS Stream 9. So CentOS Stream 9 is going to be the current for a couple more years. Until CentOS Stream 10 comes around. So what did that do to our ecosystem lifecycle? So looking back to the slide we had before, this is what that development lifecycle looks like today. So initially, we start with the Linux kernel upstream on GitHub. It's out open to the public, gets thousands of commits a day, if not every few days. And we still have Fedora Linux still out there blazing the trail, trying out new things, being able to pivot quickly from one technology stack to another. Now we've got CentOS Stream, and this is where you can really get involved. This is where you can really contribute to the next generation of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. This is a great way if you're looking to get started in the enterprise Linux space, to start developing, trying to build new applications, solving problems. CentOS Stream on the enterprise Linux side is the place to go to start your open source career. And then, of course, Red Hat Enterprise Linux with RHEL 8 and now with RHEL 9 actually moved into a predictable release cadence based upon CentOS Stream. So when CentOS Stream 10 comes out, within about a year or so, Red Hat Enterprise Linux 10 will actually come out. So RHEL 9 just came out this past May. It will be the latest major version for 3 years before CentOS 10 comes out. Or I'm sorry, before Red Hat Enterprise Linux 10 comes out. And we have a new minor release every 6 months. So within the next couple of weeks, we'll actually see 9.1 and 8.7 be released GA. And then you can reasonably assume that next spring sometime, there'll be 9.2 and 8.8. So we have that predictable release cadence, 10-year life cycle per major version, 6-month minor release, 3-year major release. And there's actually a link to the lifecycle page on redhat.com towards the end of the slide deck. I highly encourage you to go check that out because that'll show you when you can reasonably expect major and minor versions to drop. So that is a look at how things have changed over the last couple of years between CentOS Linux to CentOS Stream, and how we've not removed CentOS from the ecosystem, but we've actually given it more power. We've given it more attention. So what is CentOS Stream and how might you use it? CentOS Stream is an upstream open source development platform for Red Hat Enterprise Linux. I don't want to say it's a beta of Red Hat Enterprise Linux because it's stable in and of its own right. The difference is the CentOS Stream just moves a little bit quicker than Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Some use cases for CentOS Stream, like I mentioned, are the ability to contribute new features and new fixes to later versions of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. One of the other things, if you're a partner or if you're someone who has an application that's certified to run on Red Hat Enterprise Linux, this is a great way to go out and validate that your code, that your application, that your hardware, whatever the case may be, is actually going to work on day one of a new minor or major release. Think about this. You've got a new chip. Maybe it is a revolutionary change in how you manage onboard memory. Just for example. So you've got this thing that's going to blow DDR RAM just out of the water, and you want it to be available day one when Red Hat Enterprise Linux 10 becomes GA. Where are you going to test that? Because Red Hat Enterprise Linux doesn't go out into beta until a couple of months before the GA. So the problem is, how are you going to develop all the firmware, all the drivers, all the management application code to work with your new computer memory if you don't have a platform to develop against? That's where CentOS Stream comes into play. So not only can you contribute features and fixes and provide feedback, but you can also validate that what you want to build in-house, whether that's something you sell, whether that's something you manage, whether that's something you build or fabricate, you can actually validate it against CentOS Stream. That way, when Red Hat Enterprise Linux 10 goes into beta, you actually are in a great position to test it against CentOS Stream and then against the beta. And then you could be pretty certain that come day one, when RHEL 10 is announced, you can also go side by side with Red Hat and say, hey, guess what? Our new computer memory is there and it does something awesome. That's what I get for coming up with analogies on the fly. But you kind of understand just the power of using CentOS Stream to start building things ahead of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. And also, this I cannot stress enough. CentOS Stream, CentOS Community, with its SIGs, is an amazing place to build friendships, to build alliances between companies, to work with partners and work with Red Hat to develop code, not just for you to sell something later on, but to build your own network of people and to really, and this is going to sound so cheesy, I'm sorry, but it's true, with those relationships, with those friendships that you develop, you can actually help shape the future of technology itself. We talk about things like self-driving cars and smart cities and smart this and smart that. Using the CentOS Stream community and the ecosystem is an incredible way to shape the future. All right, I'll get off my cheesy soapbox. We'll get back to the tech. So these are some of the benefits. A lot of these I've spoken to already. CentOS Stream is constantly delivered. That's something I haven't mentioned. The nightlies are available for download. You can go and download the latest version every time. It's not a true rolling release, but it's pretty close. As I mentioned, this is not a Red Hat Enterprise Linux like pre-beta or RHEL alpha. Because it's tested and complete. You can actually boot CentOS Stream in a virtual machine on hardware on your desktop, and you can actually use it as is. And a lot of the other things that we mentioned, things like the SIGs, things like a great place to become a contributor, and of course, it is all open source. In fact, here are all the links that you need to get plugged in with CentOS Stream. As I said, their GitLab, right there in the public. CentOS Stream, right there ready for download. The project homepage, right there in the links. And in fact, if you have a couple of CentOS Stream, or if you have a couple of CentOS Linux 8 boxes still, there's a guide for converting from CentOS Linux 8 to CentOS Stream. So I highly encourage you to go in, download the resources, and give CentOS Stream a try. Now, I hope that I've shown you that I really do love the CentOS community and and really appreciate what CentOS Stream is trying to do. But here's the problem. When it comes to spending money, when it comes to betting your multi-million or multi-billion-dollar business, is that something you want to take the risk of? CentOS Stream has a limited life cycle. They produce new versions of CentOS Stream much quicker than Red Hat Enterprise Linux. There's a rapid, somewhat irregular cadence of patches and new code. I mean, that's one of the advantages to having a fast-moving distribution is once your code is ready, you can actually submit it through the pipeline, have it tested, and included in the, quote, production code. The problem is it's very irregular. So if you're trying to use this as a production operating system, you don't have an idea of when that code or when that fix will end up in the in the production repos because there's no published time frame. There's no security certifications. The security certification process, things like HIPAA, things like DISASTIG, PCI, they are very expensive and they're very time intensive. It's hard to get a Linux platform certified for different security certifications. And part of that is because of the limited life cycle and the rapid cadence that CentOS Stream is developed upon. In the same vein, it's hard to get compliance with certain regulations, certain data retention policies, that kind of thing, just because the nature of CentOS Stream being, I want to say, ever-changing, not constantly changing. Also, there's no commercial support. Also, included in the slide deck is a link to a checklist for key considerations when choosing a production-grade operating system. I highly encourage you to check that out. It is an amazing resource. So while CentOS Stream has so many use cases, how it is useful in so many different applications, if it were me as a systems administrator these days, I don't want to stake the thing that pays my salary on a community-driven project. That salary goes to feeding my family. It goes to paying for my house, so my family and I have a place to live. That's not a gamble I want to take. So how do you decide? I highly encourage you to go check out that checklist on the previous slide. But as a high-level overview, Fedora Linux is a great operating system for development, for trying out the latest technologies to see what the trends are in Linux distributions. It's also an amazing desktop use case. I've used Fedora since probably Fedora 18, probably maybe a little earlier. So Fedora Linux is great for that. The community is great for helping you get started and for trying out different technologies. CentOS Stream. If you want to be part of the Red Hat Enterprise Linux lifecycle, this is a great place to plug in, whether you're a partner, whether you're a company that's building an application for RHEL, or whether you just want to get in and start developing applications. CentOS Stream is a great place to plug in. Red Hat Enterprise Linux is your go-to for production workloads. We have all those advantages for stability, for predictable life cycles, and we'll get into that here in just a couple of slides. Also, in case you didn't know, and you're looking at container development, we also have a solution there called Universal Base Image, UBI. So built upon Podman, we actually have container images for Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and there's other resources out there that talk about UBI. You can Google it. And what it is basically RHEL stripped down to its barest essentials and stuffed into a container. So that helps you to build not only your infrastructure platform on RHEL and stability that comes with that, but now you can build your container applications on RHEL that's already prepackaged inside of a container. So if you're one of those people that I mentioned that you don't want to stake your enterprise on a community distribution, if you don't want to be spending late nights on Stack Exchange or IRC trying to troubleshoot an issue, if you need more than community, that's where Red Hat comes into play. And as a former systems administrator, I can honestly say I would not work for Red Hat or any vendor if I didn't believe in their product and what they brought to bear. And so when I was a systems administrator, these are some of the things that I dealt with that I came to find out when coming to Red Hat that I wasn't the only one. I wasn't the only systems administrator that struggled with some of the challenges of CentOS Linux. Things like support. If I am in a Sev1 production outage, the company is hemorrhaging money because it is our peak sales season and our main sales application is down. I don't want to be searching Stack Exchange. I want someone who I can call, someone who I can say, hey, this is the problem, and be able to lean on them and their teams of specialists, of product-focused support engineers that have a content database of literally millions of other tickets that they can search and see what other problems have come to bear in the same vein. I just want someone I can call and get round-the-clock support in case something were to go wrong. Also, security, things like lack of certifications. And because CentOS Linux would tend to trail Red Hat Enterprise Linux by months, if not 6 to 9 months, it was hard to say when a particular vulnerability would be patched, because that patch has to work its way through the Red Hat Enterprise Linux lifecycle for one, or not the lifecycle, but through the Red Hat Enterprise Linux QA process for one. And that can take a couple of hours to a couple of days, depending on all the different pieces that are moving in that situation, but also then has to be filtered down through Red Hat Enterprise Linux, through the CentOS community, which, if you think about community, is just another name for volunteers. So I don't want to stake a Heartbleed or one of the other named vulnerabilities that keep us up at night I don't want somebody else's volunteer time to dictate whether or not my systems are secure from one of those like 10.0 level CVEs. And also, the ecosystem is somewhat limited in CentOS. Now, granted, the common phrase is if it works on RHEL, it probably works on CentOS Linux. That's fairly true. But thinking about certifications, thinking about validation, thinking about hitting weird issues between how CentOS Linux compiles their kernel and how Red Hat Enterprise Linux compiles their kernel, that leaves a window of error, things that could potentially go wrong because of subtle little differences between CentOS Linux and Red Hat Enterprise Linux. So most companies don't validate their hardware or their application against a community distribution like CentOS Linux. So what do? That's why Red Hat Enterprise Linux is the choice. If I were to start a company and be the CTO or the CIO today, I would choose Red Hat Enterprise Linux. And that's not just, don't look at the shirt. That's not because I work for Red Hat. It's because I don't see another alternative that balances the latest in technology, stable release cadences, major releases on every few years, keeping that code base fresh and relevant. I don't see any other organization out there that offers the level of support that Red Hat engineers provide. And there's other things that even as a systems administrator, I didn't think about, things that would have made my life so much easier. Things like live kernel patches. That's the ability to implement a fix on your kernel live in memory and then take a planned, scheduled outage later when things have calmed down. You're not in a Sev 1. You're not trying to reboot your systems. You can actually fix the issue live in the middle of an outage and then plan a reboot of your application later with live kernel patches. Also, things like in-place upgrades, the ability to convert from non-Red Hat Enterprise Linux systems to Red Hat Enterprise Linux with Leap and convert to RHEL. So you can go back to the first webinar and see about convert to RHEL and Leap and what that means for your systems administrators for planning conversions and migrations and upgrades. Red Hat Enterprise Linux, I truly believe, since RHEL 8 into RHEL 9 and as we plan for RHEL 10, really provides a very delicate balance between providing the latest and greatest in applications, in kernel versions, in hardware enablement, and being able to release on a slow is a relative term, on a steady, predictable cadence. But not only is Red Hat Enterprise Linux an amazing platform, and the company has been around for years and has made such a huge contribution to the open source world, but you also have things like portfolio integration. You have Ansible automation platform. You have OpenShift. You have Quarkus. You have all these other applications that at their heart is still running on RHEL. So you have our portfolio. You have a trusted supply chain, things that we're going to hear about more and more in the coming years with government mandates, with security concerns, with more man-in-the-middle attacks on our upstream software packages. You can trust that if an RPM is signed by Red Hat, you can be sure that Red Hat has checked it and double checked it, run it through QA, run it through testing processes, and that the code that's in there is what's meant to be in that package. Now, I'd like to kind of say this is a wild card, that it's like a secret sauce of Red Hat Enterprise Linux, but in the last couple of years, I've actually kind of changed my view on Red Hat Insights. Red Hat Insights is essential to the operation of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. What it is a collection of tools that are cloud-based, where you can register your Red Hat Enterprise Linux systems, whether they're physical, virtual, or in the cloud. And that could be private clouds like OpenStack or public clouds like AWS or Azure. What Insights is it collects data, metadata from all of your registered systems and compiles it into a dashboard and runs it against millions of support cases, against thousands of data points, both within and without your infrastructure. It helps you predict risks. It helps you recommend actions you can take to make your systems more secure, more performant, more cost effective. We have a newer service called Resource Optimization that actually evaluates your workloads and how full is the memory, how active are the CPUs, and actually provides you advice of, you can actually shrink this system down by X%, or your resource seems really constrained at this time of day, so you might increase the size of your virtual machines or add in additional systems into your load balancer. Other things like Advisor checks for CVEs, vulnerability checking. It actually will let you know that, hey, this major new CVE, it's rated at a 9.7. It could actively be executed against your environment. Not only are you vulnerable, but you're actually exposed. You may want to fix this like right now. So Red Hat Insights does all of this. It's like having an entire team of security engineers, systems administrators, even database administrators, cloud engineers, all of that in one dashboard where those engineers don't take time off. They don't show up late after the big game. They're always on, and they're always looking for ways to improve your infrastructure. And that is included. So if you have Red Hat Enterprise Linux, it is absolutely no cost to run Red Hat Insights. In fact, it's one command to configure your systems to run against Red Hat Insights. So why would I use this? This sounds great, but why would I use it? It helps to protect your systems. It improves performance. In fact, it reduces downtime because you can actually plan out and stage out different changes. So maybe this weekend you're going to take all the major CVEs, anything that's like red, 8, 9, 10s, and you're going to fix those. Then during your next patch cycle, maybe you'll take some time to fix all the medium vulnerabilities, all the 5s and 6s that may not be exposed on your systems. So you can actually better plan because you know better how your systems are vulnerable. You know better what potential pitfalls and performance problems you may be having. So I could do an entire hour on Red Hat Insights by itself. I cannot talk up Red Hat Insights enough. And honestly, it's not even my product. It's one of the other teams here at Red Hat. But it is such an amazing part of Red Hat Enterprise Linux that I highly encourage you to go out to console.redhat.com and register a couple of systems with Insights and give it a try. I promise you will not be disappointed. So I mentioned subscriptions and cost management. So Red Hat Enterprise Linux has the standard commercial subscription, the one we're used to. It's been around forever, and it scales as you scale your infrastructure. So that's the first link on this slide. There's a couple of others on here that I want to call out, but I don't want to go into too much depth. There's the Red Hat Developer subscription for Teams, which is new as of 2022, and the Red Hat Developer subscription for individuals. This has been around for some time as the Red Hat Developer subscription, but it got a little bit of a facelift this year. But I'm not going to go into too much detail. Like a good talk show host, I'm going to invite you back here on, I believe, November 2nd, where we wrap up our CentOS webinar series, and we will go in depth into the Red Hat Developer Program, as well as developer subscription for individuals and subscription for teams. And also, if you are a Red Hat partner, or if you have an open source infrastructure platform, I highly recommend you check out the links here because Red Hat partners with academia, with our partners, and with open source projects to provide discounted Red Hat Enterprise Linux subscriptions. But again, come join us on November 2nd. We'll talk about each of these in much more depth. So let's say you've got CentOS Linux 7. You see this deadline. You've got 18, 19 months before CentOS Linux 7 goes end of life, and maybe it's the hair, maybe it's the presentation, or maybe it just makes sense. You want to move to Red Hat Enterprise Linux. We have tools in place like convert to rel that help you do that in place. So with convert to rel, you can actually convert rel-like systems to Red Hat Enterprise Linux. All you need is an active subscription and the convert to rel utility. So if you have Oracle Linux 8 or CentOS Linux 7, you can actually convert to the same major version of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Coming soon, probably in the spring or sometime next year, we'll be looking at some conversion options for Red Hat Enterprise Linux 9. So stay tuned for that. But why would I want to do an in-place conversion versus just spinning up a Red Hat Enterprise Linux box? I'm so glad you asked. It leads to a shorter maintenance window because you're doing an in-place conversion. You don't have to redeploy your operating system. You don't have to order new hardware. You don't have to spin up new instances on your cloud provider. All your configuration is preserved. All those user accounts, passwords, cron jobs, anything that's running on your system will be maintained intact. The only thing that you have to do is just install this convert to rel package, and it's 3 or 4 dependencies. Run the wizard. It basically talks you through what it's doing every step of the way, does the conversion, reboots your system, and what powered down as CentOS Linux then powers up as Red Hat Enterprise Linux. So it is the quickest and easiest way to get from CentOS Linux to Red Hat Enterprise Linux with a minimum amount of downtime and maintenance windows. So if you go back, there's a slide at the end of the deck that talks about the webinar series. So if you go back and look at the first webinar in our series, I go into much, much more depth of convert to rel and in-place upgrades and some of the other utilities, Red Hat Insights as well. So go back and check out the first webinar in our series. I am in love with Red Hat and Red Hat Enterprise Linux and the open source community. I feel like that shows through no matter what I talk about in this space. I am passionate about the open source community, about what technology benefits when it comes to open source. But sometimes you just need the dollar signs to go with that. Sometimes passion and drive isn't enough. Sometimes you need to put a dollar sign with it. So according to an IDC paper that Red Hat sponsored in April of 21, we actually came up with some numbers. So if you convert your workloads to Red Hat Enterprise Linux, if you standardize on our ecosystem, if you standardize on our partners, if you really look at the value that our subscription brings, you can look at 21% fewer servers required to run your workloads. So as a longtime systems administrator, I used to remember having to order not just one server, not 3 servers, but probably 4, because you want a cluster of 3, but you also want to have one on standby, and it may not ever do much, but you ordered 3 or 4 servers at a time because that's just what you did. But with Red Hat Enterprise Linux and the stability that it brings, our customers have actually reported buying 21% less servers. When you look at physical requirements, power requirements, cloud spend, support staff and support time, these same customers looked at a 16% lower operating cost. And with these two, we saw 32% less staff time to manage infrastructure. That's not less staff, that's less staff time. So what do you do with that 32%? Go out and learn something. Go make your infrastructure better. Include optimization, automation. Make your systems better. And not only a big part of that 32% less staff time is less unplanned downtime, 81%. So when you couple Red Hat Enterprise Linux and a tool like Red Hat Insights, you partner them together, 81% less unplanned downtime. That's 81% of your time that is spent not fighting fires. When you put all that together, you're looking at savings of $9.23 million average higher net revenue per year per organization. What could your company do with an almost $9.5 million more? I don't know about you, but I could imagine hardware refreshes, increased PTO for employees, better competitive salaries. I mean, there's a lot you can do with $9.23 million in a year. If you have that sitting around, I'm open to donations. Talk to me after class. I'm more than happy to hook you up. So if you don't want $9.25 million, then, just let me know. So it's not just my desire to run Red Hat Enterprise Linux anywhere. It really does make a difference. And so I want to wrap this up and provide you with some extra resources so that if this talk has inspired you at all, I want to equip you to be able to go out and find the resources that you need, make the business case, make the technological case. So today we kind of heard a little bit of my backstory. I think I jumped on the therapy couch a time or two. We talked about what changed in CentOS Linux, the project and the community. We talked about CentOS Stream, and we talked about Red Hat Enterprise Linux. If you'd like to connect more with us, there's some links to YouTube, Twitter, the Red Hat subreddit, where you can connect with not only Red Hatters, but some of our partners are out there. We produce video content, blogs, Twitter posts, and of course, hang out in the Red Hat subreddit. Also, if you would like more content like this, I actually host a couple of different I actually host a couple of different shows on YouTube and Twitch. There's Rel Presents and Into the Terminal. Rel Presents is kind of an industry and product level look at Red Hat Enterprise Linux, our partners, and the industry at large. Into the Terminal is more of an admin 101 level. How do I get involved in the command line? Where do I go from there? And then, as promised, here are some links to convert to RHEL, top reasons for migrating to a new operating system, a link to the developer for Teams, but also, of course, there on the right-hand column, a link to our previous and our upcoming webinars in the series. So as a reminder, this was webinar number 3 in our series of 4. So go catch the other 2, and be sure to stay tuned on November 2nd for our last webinar in the series. Before I open up to questions, I really honestly and sincerely want to thank you for spending this time with us. I know an hour is a lot to ask in today's busy world. I sincerely thank you for your attention, for being attentive, for listening to what I have to say, even if I tend to ramble from time to time. I know webinars are a lot to ask in this new normal that we find ourselves in. So sincerely, from my heart and from the entire Red Hat Enterprise Linux team, thank you for joining us at this point. I'd love to open it up to questions. I saw a few pop up in the chat, so let's hand it over to our moderator to talk about some of the questions you have, and we'll get some of those answered. Okay. Although I'm not sure why I just said moderator. We don't have one. It's just me. So bear with me for just a second here. Okay, so Alberto asks, how does Stream compare to Oracle Linux? Great question. That's probably something I should have called out during the webinar itself. So Stream feeds Stream is the upstream to Red Hat Enterprise Linux, whereas Oracle Linux is a downstream of RHEL. So what that means is, if you remember the slide earlier on, we had Fedora feeding CentOS Stream, feeding Red Hat Enterprise Linux. So if you were to scroll to the right a little bit further and look at some of the RHEL-like clones, that would be Oracle Linux, that would be Alma, Rocky, a few others. Excuse me. So Oracle Linux pulls from Red Hat, and they rebuild their packages using our published source code. That's one of the requirements for being an open source project, is that all your packages are available. So we publish the source code. Oracle Linux takes that source code and kind of compiles their own RHEL-like operating system. So CentOS Stream feeds Red Hat Enterprise Linux, which feeds Oracle Linux. Join me for a different session where we can talk about some of the RHEL clones. I won't get into that today because I know I kind of talked for quite some time. Alberto also asked, do you recommend using Stream for production? I know I talked about this during the presentation itself, but I just want to reiterate that CentOS Stream is an amazing platform. The problem is the releases are not as predictable. The technology stack shifts a little bit more, and probably the biggest thing of all is I would not be doing my job as an operations advocate. Someone who has turned from sysadmin to former sysadmin with microphone is the way I see it. I couldn't suggest that as a use case. I don't. We as sysadmins hold a lot of power and a lot of pull within our companies, and I couldn't suggest using an unsupported platform to run our production applications. So if that's what our company depends upon for bringing in revenue, which then ties into our salary as sysadmins, we have families to feed, we have bills to pay. I can't advocate for that. Not saying anything against Stream as a platform. I've got a few servers here in my home lab that I use for running different apps, just kind of get an idea of what's coming. Alberto, okay, so thank you for answering your question. So John asks, in an upcoming webinar, can you demo out Red Hat Insights? It'll be great to see it in action. So I love Insights. I think I ran the risk of making this a webinar about Insights, but I can say that if you go out to the Red Hat YouTube channel or to the Red Hat Enterprise Linux YouTube channel, let's see, I'm trying to think. So if you search for Red Hat Insights, on YouTube or on Google, you'll find quite a bit of content out there. John Spinks is one of the technical marketers for Insights, as well as some of the other Red Hat Enterprise Linux team. There's a ton of content out there, but yeah, I think in the end of the session survey there is a free form box. If that's something you'd be interested in, definitely let the moderators know that that's something you'd be interested in. I'd be more than happy to talk about Insights or bring in John to talk about it. So with Pedro asks, how do you answer a client that has issues with RHEL servers calling home Red Hat for console and Insights? Great question. So console.redhat.com, Insights, that does call home. However, that information is scrubbed before it leaves the server. So while it does call home, while it does send information up, I think I read the other day that Red Hat Insights collects like 1% of what you would submit in an SOS report. So it's SOS is that huge tar file that you make on your server and you upload to a ticket when you're working with support. So it's a very, very small amount of data. It's very, very cleansed of any PII, or I guess not PII, but any identifiable information. Also, if you look for Red Hat Insights security, there is a page on redhat.com that specifically calls out what it is that Insights pulls in. Insights is an opt-in solution, so it's not something that you just install it and all of a sudden there it is. So you actually have to register your systems with Insights. But having been a sysadmin in a previous life, the advantages far outweigh the security risks or the sharing of private information. But definitely check out that Red Hat Insights security page. And if you Google that specific key, that specific string of information, you'll be able to find it. It is Red Hat Insights Security. Should bring you to the right page. John also asks, if you have some legacy CentOS 6 systems, can you upgrade them in place to RHEL 7 and 8? So our first webinar in the series, we talked about in-place upgrades and convert to RHEL. So I'd highly recommend going and checking that session out for a little bit more in-depth. So with CentOS 6 being end of life and RHEL 6 being in extended lifecycle support, there's too many unknowns. It's too it's a very iffy proposition. So convert to RHEL doesn't support CentOS 6 to RHEL 6, and CentOS and then RHEL 6 in place upgrades are no longer a supported operation with CentOS Linux 6 coming. With RHEL 6 coming end of life completely here in the coming months. So if you're running CentOS 6 or RHEL 6 at this point, I'd highly recommend doing just a rip and replace build up a RHEL 8 or RHEL 9 box, move your application data over, and then do package updates to more current levels. Then you can from RHEL 8, RHEL 9, you can move forward with package updates using application streams, DNF installs, DNF updates. Or even containers. So unfortunately, CentOS 6 is not a use case that we support any longer. In fact, not only just from a support perspective, but the RHEL 6 upgrade tool was different than Leap, which is what we're using in 7, 8, and 9. And it is a much, much better set of tools. Leap is actually a much better upgrade experience than the Red Hat upgrade tool, I think is what it was called in RHEL 6. So at this point, I just recommend containerizing your application and moving it to a more current operating system. John asked, does Red Hat offer any trial subscriptions to test out any of the tools such as Insights or Convert to RHEL? Great question. Yes, we do. If you go to red.ht/tryrel, that's red.ht/tryrel. You can sign up for a trial of Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and that will, I believe, Insights is supported off the top of my head. I can't think of any reason why it wouldn't be. And then Convert to RHEL, that should work on a trial basis as well. I'm about 90% sure that a trial will support both Insights and Convert to REL. If not, reach out to me at IT Guy or just about anywhere, and I've got some other solutions in mind that could help you try that process out. Actually, lab.redhat.com. If you go to lab.redhat.com, it just published like 2 weeks ago, a Convert to REL lab. So if you wanted to just try out the process for yourself, and at least one Insights lab. This is what's funny about doing live Q&A is all this is like coming to me after the fact. So lab.redhat.com, there are actually live labs. They're free, no need to register. You can look up Insights and Convert to REL labs right there on lab.redhat. Jeffrey asks, what is his or her name? Cute dog. That is my coworker. Her name is Jenny. She's a miniature Australian Shepherd. And she is my office assistant. If I'm up here working, she's pretty much right there, passed out on the bed. She's featured in a lot of my videos and live streams. Tawanda asks, how does CentOS Streams compare to Rocky Linux? So much like Oracle Linux, Rocky takes the published source code of Red Hat Enterprise Linux and recompiles it for their own distribution. So CentOS Stream feeds Red Hat Enterprise Linux, which then feeds a lot of the clones that you see. So that includes Rocky, Alma. There's one that's pretty popular in Europe as well, and then Oracle Linux. So CentOS Stream doesn't feed Oracle or Rocky directly. Oracle and Rocky pull from Red Hat Enterprise Linux source code, which is built off of Red Hat, or which is built off of CentOS Stream. Never mind. You just okay. and then on the next page of the Q&A, Tawanda says, "Never mind." So. So Paul asks, since Rocky and Alma filled the void, why was CentOS killed? And I really, really, so when the CentOS project announced that CentOS Linux was being end of lifed, there was this huge media hype. There's this huge campaign against the community and against Red Hat and IBM, saying that it was killed. And I'm a little bit triggered by that term. It's a little bit of an overreaction to the natural progression of technology, and I have to be careful here because I don't want to say anything out of sorts. But CentOS didn't die. The community is still there. A lot of the same people that have been a part of the CentOS community are still there. They're still actively involved. CentOS, the community just shifted. Technology shifts, it changes, it evolves. If it didn't, then we'd still be using AOL dial-up internet instead of high-speed fiber connections. So CentOS morphed, it evolved. Of course, now I'm thinking about Pokemon, and my kids love that game. So we're not running CentOS Linux anymore, which was a downstream clone of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Instead, it evolved into CentOS Streams. So, Paul, I'm more than happy to have a conversation about CentOS Linux at a later time. It's not dead. The community is still there, and in all reality, it's the people that matter more than the technology. It's the personalities and the friendships more than the bytes and the bits. So CentOS is alive and well. In fact, reorganizing behind CentOS Streams has actually given it a new life and a new purpose for the CentOS community. And I predict over the next few years that we're going to see the results of that. So Paul, more than happy to talk about that offline. But Rocky and Alma came to fill a void that they saw, and more power to them. I know Alma is doing a lot of good work, and Rocky has a lot of interest in the high performance computing space. So they're kind of filling niches that they see as important. Whereas CentOS Linux is now CentOS Streams and trying to really focus on the future of technology. Paul asks, is DKMS used for the running kernel software injection? That is a good question, and off the top of my head, I'm not really sure what you're asking or how to answer that. Is DKMS used for the running kernel software injection? So I think you're talking about how the kernel is actually compiled. And to be honest, that is beyond me. I am a simple sysadmin turned marketer, so I'm not exactly sure at that level what's going on. But if you head out to Twitter, @rel is our Twitter handle. If you want to re-ask that question, I know we've got an awesome social media team that works on those questions, and we would know who to ask to identify the answer to your question. Paul also asks, is an SOS file like a log archive for support? Yes, it is a log archive. It is a readout of all the packages that are installed, version numbers, kernel versions, kernel modules. So an SOS file is just a huge collection of things that could help solve a potential issue when you're sending to support. In fact, pro tip, if you open a support case that has to do with the technical bits and bytes of Red Hat Enterprise Linux, I always encourage folks to go ahead and make that SOS file and attach it to the initial log, because at some point during the troubleshooting process, you'll probably get asked for one. So it's just easier to do that when you open up a issue. Pedro asks, can we have RHEL servers not calling home /Red Hat? Yes, like I said, Red Hat Insights is opt-in. So you actually have to install the Insights client, RPM. You actually have to register that system with Insights. So other than that, it's completely an opt-in process. But as you could see, it is a huge boom to any workload. Christian asks, I'm sorry if this was asked before as I had to step away. Do you have any insight into CentOS Stream deployments in an air-gapped environment, specifically speaking in those environments supporting government work? So I'd actually be surprised to see CentOS Stream in a government air-gapped environment, just because it is so fast moving. It is not, there are no guarantees around its life cycle or its compatibility with third-party applications. And maybe this has changed, but when I was a contractor for the GSA as a federal government contractor, we couldn't use open source projects. They all had to, well, not, let me clarify that. We couldn't use free applications, community projects. There had to be some kind of a partnership. There had to be an approved vendors list. So outside of development, I would be incredibly surprised to see CentOS Stream deployed in government air-gapped environments. As such, I really don't have any insight or anything more I could say about that. Usually the government partners, in fact, a lot of government agencies are huge Red Hat partners, and we do a lot of what is it, Gov Cloud work as well. So I don't really have anything else to add. But if you do know of some government environments that are air-gapped that are using CentOS Stream, I'd be more than happy to have a conversation. I would find that pretty interesting. Alberto and Jeffrey say thank you, and that brings us to past the top of the hour and to the bottom of our Q&A. So really appreciate you all joining us. Really appreciate you all sticking around, asking some really great questions. And in fact, one of you was even able to stump this chump, so congrats on that. But other than that, thank you all so much for joining us. We will see you, in a week to talk about developer subscriptions for Red Hat and some of the different ways that you can interact with us. So really looking forward to wrapping up this webinar series, and make sure to fill out the survey at the end, as that helps me improve both as a presenter and as the type of content that we bring to you. So with that said, we will see you in a week, and thank you so much for joining us.